And sometimes you just got to have stop-go points and go, okay, well, if that's going to play out, there's my plan A, got a plan B. It's not unusual in that we plan D, E and F, playing out. So I think it's
plan F, we're fucked.
Well, yeah, interesting you say that. I remember for us 2017 to 2020 were 3 back-to-back drought years, so I feel your pain.
Welcome to Series 3 of Healthy Minds, Healthy Vines, a podcast proudly developed by the Wine Grape Council of South Australia and hosted by Callum McPherson and Nick Ryan. I'm Lisa Bonilla, CEO of the Council, and I'm delighted to bring you this series. The Wine Grape Council of South Australia represents our state's independent wine grape growers. We aim to provide growers with timely support and effective representation through advocacy, collaboration and knowledge building. South Australia is home to just over half of Australia's vineyard area, and it's the diversity of our independent growers, their stories, challenges and opportunities that shows just how important connection is in grape growing. In this new series, we bring you 10 unique conversations, sharing a rich mix of views, experiences, knowledge and questions from across our grape and wine community. From personal journeys to practical insights, each episode is designed to spark thought, build connection and support well-being in our industry. So wherever you're listening, in the vineyard, on the road or at home, we invite you to tune in and be part of building healthy minds and healthy vines together.
Liz Riley is a true pillar of Australian viticulture with more than 30 years working across vineyard management, biosecurity, sustainability and industry leadership. Liz runs her own consultancy through Vitibit, helping growers build healthier, more resilient vineyards. She also manages her family vineyards at the Scarborough Wine Co and plays a vital role in education through her teaching at Tocal College, passing on her skills and knowledge to the next generation of viticulturists. Respected for her practical wisdom and big picture thinking, Liz is as comfortable talking about soil microbes as she is about the future of the wine community. Here's Liz.
Liz, what's kept you in viticulture for more than 30 years?
I think that every season's different, Callum. It's not the same, and you learn a bit more, you're a bit older and wiser, but you still get things that come out randomly that keep it exciting.
Is that frustrating?
No, I think it's what keeps it interesting. It's probably frustrating when you can't find tools to help you. So, no, it's all good.
What got you started?
Very accidental viticulturist, I have to say. I finished school and I started studying horticulture at Murdoch Uni in Perth, where I grew up. And I literally walked past a bulletin board that had wine science, Roseworthy, and I went, oh, that looks kind of cool. And my parents thankfully agreed to fund me to go on the basis that if I didn't complete it, I had to come back and finish what I'd started. But I didn't ever come back. So, yeah, quite accidental.
What was the Roseworthy that you arrived at like back in those days?
Oh, it was pretty fun, Nick. We were in that last couple of years where the course was fully Roseworthy based.
Yep.
We didn't do anything in Adelaide bar plant the new vineyard at the Waite. So it was live in, work hard, play hard.
Yep.
Peas get degrees, let's be honest. We weren't there for
high distinctions.
No. So I lived a pretty sheltered city life, so it was a bit of an eye-opener, but it was also great. I was with a couple of my uni cohort over the weekend, and we were talking about, particularly being women there at the time, it was like having a big group of big brothers. You know, everyone played hard, but people kept an eye out and looked after you. So, yeah, it was a pretty special time.
Yeah, well, at least there were other women there with you. I always have remembered the story Pam Dunsford tells of being the first ever female student there at Roseworthy, and they had nowhere to put her, so she was in the infectious diseases ward of the infirmary at Roseworthy. That was where she was living when she first arrived. So at least it had changed a bit by the time you got there.
Yeah, and I think we were pretty lucky. So we were a wine science cohort of about 30, and then 6 of us did viticulture, and that was 50-50 men and women. So one of the stories that came out over the weekend was that Peter Dry had to ring Di Davidson and have a chat about how do I look after all these girls, which I hadn't heard before. But it's great. That's a sign of a good leader, isn't it? Going out and seeking some advice. And he survived and we all survived, and I think he'd be pretty pleased
with the industry
how we've all
impact.
progressed.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you still work hard, play hard, Liz?
Yes, maybe playing a bit wiser when I play hard. We're not as resilient as we used to be, and parenting, takes a bit of the edge off that. But no, there's still some hard playing that happens in the background.
That's a Hunter thing. It's famous for it.
It is.
But
it is.
We've talked a lot in this series about a sense of community, and winemaking exists in a community. I said, I think in a previous episode, that the wine industry would be a very different thing if it took place in a CBD. It is that the nature of community and the fact that these are, generally small sort of regional communities. That's a really important part of how wine operates in this country.
Oh, absolutely. I think community and people are everything. And I feel like it's like a giant Venn diagram. There's your local community, your state community, it's your technical community, it's your career community, your uni cohort. There's so many circles that you move in. And, I know when I moved up here, becoming part of a new community was pretty great, but having a connection to a community back in SA was pretty important as well.
Yeah.
There's been some tough seasons of late. How have people been adapting?
It has been pretty tough. And it's tough in lots of aspects. Most of it's been weather related in our part of the world, but it's the same financial challenge as everywhere else. So communities are pulling together and trying to support each other, and that looks different in different places. Sometimes it's just that ability for us to physically get together and have a chat, cup of tea, coffee, a beer. It's sometimes going around and physically lending someone a hand as well, or just being there when they don't have a solution and trying to work with them to find that. And that's not always easy.
And with your work, you've sort of got this national sort of perspective and reach. So you're seeing sort of the real vagaries of, different conditions, up in the Hunter where it's been so damn wet, where, my place in Clare, we've been so damn dry. You're seeing all the extremes. I mean, is there a way to, there's obviously not one size fits all solution, out there, how we tackle these things?
No, there's not. And I think, none of us have got a very big, checkbook at the moment. So it's not one size fits all. And I think, I guess for me, the way you have to manage certainly that climatic stuff is you've got to, what I do is I take a longer term, like what's the seasonal outlook? And I kind of start to make a game plan. And then you've got to work back to, maybe looking 2 months out, and then you've got to come back to maybe the next month. And then you've got to come back practically to what can I do this week? And so looking at the bigger picture, you might go, well, the outlook's going to be dry. What levers can I pull? And sometimes you've just got to have stop-go points and go, okay, well, if that's going to play out, there's my plan A, I've got a plan B. It's not unusual to end up with plan D, E, and F, playing out. So I think it's
plan F, we're fucked.
Well, yeah, interesting you say that. I remember for us, 2017 to 2020 were 3 back-to-back drought years, so I feel your pain down in Clare. And I remember the first drought, it's kind of good, not a bad thing. You get pretty epic fruit. The second year is harder. The third year, I remember getting to those plans C, D, and E, where you're sort of going, well, once I get to flowering, I actually might have to make a decision to cut some water off. I'm going to cut water off to my reds and just water my white blocks at a higher value.
Yeah.
And we didn't quite get through because obviously the 2020 smoke and bushfires scenario played out. But I remember thinking, I don't know if I could do a fourth season.
Yeah.
And it then rained, thankfully. But, you keep going back to the toolbox and you keep coming up with game plans. But, yeah, it gets pretty hard to keep getting out of bed and doing it again.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, you're tackling those sorts of things, from a technical perspective on one hand, but how do you do it from an emotional perspective? You've got a toolbox of technical things you can do in the vineyard to deal with tough times, but how do you do it on a personal and emotional level?
For me, I think having a partner who's embedded in the industry and, deeply and with family skin in the game, it's a shared pain, for want of a better term.
Yeah.
So you've got someone else who at least understands what's on your mind. But for me, sometimes it's just hopping in the car and shimming on down to Newcastle and going and having a swim, that, that cathartic, putting your head into the ocean and letting it wash away for a little while. So, mate, escapism, I suppose, that's a bit healthy for me. I grew up by the sea, so the sea fixes everything.
Yeah, but I guess when you're both in it, you can say it's a problem shared, but it's also a problem multiplied. I mean,
yeah, absolutely,
because your stresses are his stresses too.
Yeah, and it works the other way. You see each other getting antsy over things you might not share. Like I might have had a client that I don't want to share something or work through a scenario, and at the same time he's working through his own business pressures. So yeah, look, it's probably a bit of a double-edged sword, but I think after nearly 30 years of marriage, we're better together than apart. So yeah, we've certainly reminded each other that there are things beyond your control, and if you've done the best you can, and if you maybe haven't got the result you want, what did you learn from it? So I think there's a little bit of, support, but try and get something out of it than just wallow.
What does your day-to-day look like, Liz?
Oh, it's pretty variable these days. So, one day I could be in a vineyard. The next day it might be doing dreaded bookwork. It could be delivering a training session. It could be in a board meeting. So I really pivoted what I started to do in my business probably 3 or 4 years ago. So, yeah, it's no 2 days are the same, no 2 weeks are the same.
You haven't got AI doing the bookwork yet?
No, I'm a bit of a Luddite, and my husband will tell you I'm a creature of habit. So I don't have to do a whole lot of it, but I'm just sticking with it at the moment.
How have practices been changing around pest management and biosecurity and sustainable practices? What have been some of the things that have stood out to you in recent times, and how people are changing the way they go about things?
I think we'd call it a quiet evolution rather than a revolution. People are certainly looking at some of the new ag tech things. There's been a bit of stuff kind of being showcased this season with the autonomous machinery and the UVC for disease control, and drones obviously keep popping up. I think it feels like we're on a cusp of new options. Obviously, all of us have seen ag tech being thrown at us as the panacea, but a lot of it hasn't got there. But some of this stuff in just the last 6 months is looking a little bit more realistic. Biosecurity, I think we're all grappling with it. It's not the easiest thing. It comes with the cost. And I think sometimes we maybe forget the cost of not doing it right. So sustainable wine growing adoption has probably really driven that a little bit. It's got a bit more focus back on it, just because everyone's having to address it and think about it, which is a good thing. But yeah, it's just constant little changes. I don't think we're seeing step change at the moment.
We've heard some passionate opinions about glyphosate. What's your perspective on that?
I understand the concerns, but for many of us, whether it's glyphosate or other herbicides, because glyphosate's not the only one sort of under the spotlight, is it needs to be carefully used, strategic, and ideally as part of an integrated program. Sometimes looking at the alternatives aren't necessarily great for your site or your region or your soils either. So I'm probably in a little bit of everything as appropriate category.
Is that difficult to implement?
Yes and no. I think some of it's a mindset shift. Some of it's about bringing other people on your journey when you want the vineyard to look a bit hairier. So I think, when we all left uni, we were all really encouraged that, minimise any competition, don't want to have weeds, and your vineyard was really a monoculture. And I think we've all shifted now, that vineyards are ecosystems and they need to be biodiverse with flora and fauna. And, it's working out when you need to manage that area. So for us, we've really moved to tolerating a lot more undervine weed, depending on what the weeds are. Maybe not such a fan of kikuyu and cooch, but, I can tolerate a whole lot of other things in my undervine area over winter and in autumn, versus once I get into the growing season where I need airflow and, I'm putting on water and maybe a bit of nutrition that, I don't really want to invest that in weeds. I need to manage them there. But, part of it for us is, we've probably, I'm just going to pluck a number out there, maybe halved our herbicide use. So, changing how wide we spray it, letting things be more scrappy at different times of the year. And, there's people in our family who are very uncomfortable with how that might look, but, we're trying to bring our cellar door staff and our customers on the journey that this scrappy look is the new normal, and that's how we manage our ecosystem. So we're trying to find the middle ground of what works for the vineyard and what works for the environment, which is not always perfect, but we can't be green if we're in the red.
But yeah, and the aesthetic appeal of a vineyard is probably the least compelling, reason to get out there and get working on it.
Yeah, although, some people might have a different opinion on that. And look, Bowling Green vineyards are pleasing to the eye, but I find a vineyard now that's got things that are flowering, and I can walk into and see lacewings and lady beetles and praying mantises. That's pretty exciting, but you've got to make that exciting for other people. It's always, we're not all on the same page.
Yeah.
Is that something that people are having to explain to punters when they come to vineyards and cellar doors and everything isn't in a straight line? That becoming part of the conversation where you're explaining what makes things perfectly straight and even versus gnarled and a bit uneven, and trying to educate people who aren't in it about what's actually going on there?
Yeah, absolutely. And you take people down to different depths on how deep you go with that. So, we've made some little, A4 flyers that sit on the table on the cellar door, and there's kind of a autumn winter version and a spring summer version. So depending on what they see when they're there, it explains some of those sustainability initiatives, because, sometimes it's the vineyard floor, but it might be other things. It might be the fact we're moving to steel posts that we can recycle, or it might be why that flowering thing is out there.
Do all those flyers say, please don't take your bloody selfies in the vineyard?
Yeah, we've got quite a few signs up really discouraging people from going in there. But when we get trade or wine media who do have a pretty good understanding, we'll dive a bit deeper, into explaining the why. And, for example, with herbicide, I remember we had a group maybe 18 months ago, and we had not long before applied a herbicide. It was very obvious it was dying off. And, the question obviously is, so you're obviously not organic. And we're like, no, because that's not appropriate for us in our region and under the weather conditions. Our carbon miles and our carbon footprint would be really high. So we're trying to straddle that. And again, explaining that this is just one part of a bigger seasonal approach. So you dive deeper. Depending on who you're talking to.
Is that a comment that you get much? Like, is there quite a bit of pressure for people to be organic, and that a the topic of conversation?
I think for a lot of people, organic is the default position of what's best practice, which, certainly not for me in our region, the right thing. There's when we first came to the Hunter in the early 90s, the Hunter traditionally would have been cultivated vineyard, 8 or 9 times a season. We saw, the most horrific soil compaction, to the point soil structure was cracking horizontally as opposed to vertically. And that had a pretty big impact for both Jeremy and I. And we have really made that what we wanted to change in our vineyards. So, that will be no different in the longer term if you keep doing undervine cultivation. We also live on hills. We get really rapid rainfall events. So for us to cultivate undervine would potentially be a huge erosion risk. So, again, it's trying to find the best you can do, and it varies year to year. It's not a recipe. So you've got to be really agile.
Yeah, it's even within region, let alone, broader across the country. Yeah, and there probably wouldn't be a Hunter, if it was to be managed in strict, principles like that.
Well, if we were to lose all herbicides, we'd find a solution, but it will add to our carbon footprint. It'll add to our operating costs, and it may be more environmentally detrimental. So, I guess if you want to take the really high moral ground, we're a luxury item, should we be doing this at all?
Yeah.
But it does give us all a lot of pleasure. So, again, it's all about moderation.
What does slashing herbicide use do for people's bottom line? Like, what is the reality of, if you were to do that, what does that mean in dollars and cents?
Well, if you need to use mechanical methods, there's a capital investment straight up, of different undervine equipment. So for most of us, that's pretty painful. And again, depending on what you buy, you've got to run it at a lower speed than you would traditionally. So there's a higher labour input. Some of those activities aren't going to give you the sustained control, which means you've got to do them more frequently. So it's more tractor passes, more labour, and potentially needing more equipment to get round at the rate to maintain that level of control you want at certain times of the season. I kind of get, I get a bit nervous when I think about, when we get high rainfall and high temperatures, like grass literally grows overnight. Like we would mow our lawn every 6 days up here in the summer, is that you probably can't keep up with mowing or whatever undervine. So you'd have to get pretty creative and think about what you're doing. Yeah.
You tell us a bit about aerial pest and disease response.
Our pest pressure's not too high up here. We get, a little bit of light brown, a little bit of vine moth. So, they're pretty easily managed with relatively soft insecticides. We get a little bit of mealybug and a little bit of scale. They seem to be becoming bigger issues for us like other regions. So we've been playing with a bit of predatory or beneficial insect releases. So predatory mites and lacewings and cryptolemus for different things at different times of the year. Probably birds are becoming, a bigger issue. And post the drought, they certainly appeared in the drought and they've hung around, unfortunately. So netting of strategic blocks is starting to come into play, which, again, none of us really like. It's adding another plastic, to the system. But you have this conflict of land use when you've got lots of accommodation. Walking around with your shotty doesn't go so well. No, pest pressure's okay. Fungal pressure's obviously what probably keeps me more awake at night.
What are you seeing as the biggest risks for vineyards going forward?
Land use conflict, I think, is a really significant one. Tourism or lack of profitability, saying land being sold for other activities, whether it's tourism, which, don't get me wrong, tourism is really valuable, but once we start to lose bits of land, that can have an impact. There's a knock-on about, neighbours.
That's particular hunter pressure too. I was up there a couple of weeks ago and, looking at what is, was one of the region's finest vineyards all being ripped up for a housing development.
Yeah.
And it's, it's heartbreaking to see.
Yeah. Profitability and aging vineyard assets and that ability to reinvest in those is a real challenge. I think the hunter's a distorted market because we have people from Sydney. It's not an agricultural market. It's a weekender market, for want of a better term. And with that loss of some of that older vineyards, there's some pretty unique genetics that go. And I literally had that conversation with someone this morning, is that that vineyard is beyond its financially viable life and you can't justify retaining it as a barrier to some land use change, but there's no one who can go in and take cuttings and be the custodian of those genetics. So I think that's really quite sad.
There's even layering on that, and this big vineyard that we're talking about, it's a Shiraz vineyard, but and he has taken cuttings from there and put them on another soil he's got because it's semi-on soil.
Same.
Yeah, it's not Shiraz dirt. It's semi-on, sandy stuff. So, it's going to hold it there for a little while until he.
But at least the genetics have been retained. If they were able to find another bit of dirt that was similar to where they were, and I know what you're talking about, that would be great. So at least that's been saved. But it's not ideal. Yeah.
What other broader issues do you see? I mean, because, at this stage of your career, you've got this sort of broader perspective and leadership roles around the industry. What else do you see, across the country?
It's everything from a workforce that's more youthful. I'm 53 and I still sit probably right on that cusp of being, am I in the older half or the younger half?
Yeah.
Although I have to admit,
I think we're in the younger half.
I think we're in the younger half too, but that's a bit sad if we're in the younger half at 53. I have to admit, one of the good things that came out of COVID was the number of hospitality people who became COVID refugees and came out to the regions to prune And a number of those people have stayed. They've made those career shifts. So that labour component, the succession of industry leaders, Future Leaders has been a great program, and I think we need to start seeing more of those people, moving into some of those industry board roles. And Future Leaders is a great part of the process, but there's probably more there where people need to get a bit of board experience, through the regions and work their way up. Oh, look, climate change is there, but I think we're actually managing climate change relatively well. Sales, if we're not selling wine, all of us are in trouble. So the sales and marketing part is not part of it. I feel like there's a challenge around every corner, Nick. There's biosecurity, it's marketing, it's sales, it's future R&D that's both applied, but also, that random blue sky stuff that someone just finds out because they're mixing A with B and they get F,
Yeah. What are the opportunities that excite you, though? There's always challenges. There's always got to be opportunities.
Oh, look, the one I'm banging on the most about at the moment is disease-resistant vines. And that's probably driven by the climate I spend most of my time in. So I spend a lot of time talking to Kim Chalmers and the other nurseries about that kind of material coming in, and I'm really heartened that there's some stuff that's hit the ground in the last sort of couple of months. So I see that for me as the next big step change to me changing my vineyard operating. So it's not just about less fungicide applications. It's about my ability to maybe let the grass grow longer because I can tolerate, slightly more hairy disease conditions. That will then mean it frees up labour. That will also change my ecosystem mix because I can support more beneficials deeper into the season. I find that fascinating. So, yeah, that's the big ticket one for me.
I mean, and that's talking about our younger vines, but there seems to be an increasing global interest in old vines, and suddenly in Europe they're talking about what they consider to be old vines, and somehow don't kind of acknowledge that that's something that we've had here for a very long time and been working with here for a long time. Do you think we do a good enough job of selling the story of our old vine resource?
Yeah, I think that the people who are fortunate enough to be custodians of that stuff, the Henschkes, the Tyrrells, those guys, yeah, it is absolutely part of their story. And it's probably a catch-22. In some ways, you don't want people knowing what you've got stashed out in the vineyard. It protects it being a little bit under the radar, but I think they do a good job. And again, it's part of the story. Australia is a diverse offering, so it shouldn't be our only story, but no, I think it's done quite well.
Okay, that's an interesting way you frame that. And we talked about biosecurity. Now we're just maybe talking about security in general. We see a time where we're going to have fences and around our vineyards. I mean, they seem to be, very accessible and perhaps vulnerable. Yeah,
look, I hope we don't have to do that, but the technocrat goes, lock it up and put a big fence around it, but I think it's about that whole wine, viticulture, agricultural lifestyle story that we have is we want it to be accessible. We want it to be inviting. It would just be nice if we could put a bit of signage up and people could be respectful and enjoy it all from the outside. But, we've all heard the story of Murray Tyrrell jumping over the fence in the Chardonnay. So, our industry is also built on a bit of that skullduggery.
Yeah. Yeah, and the Kiwis and their peanut, their gumboot clones, and, that is part of the mythology.
Yeah.
Liz, having been around for such a long time, do you feel like you see the same challenges go around and around in a cyclical fashion, or are you facing different problems today than you were in past decades?
I think there's a mix of both. I know when we were early in our career, how you get people who tell you stuff that they think you need to know, and you kind of go, oh, what would they know? That's from the olden days. We're those people now. And, it's like me, having the conversation with someone who's getting into me about my herbicide use, which is not excessive, like in the scheme of things, and going, oh, you've got to get an undervine cultivator, an undervine mower. And I said, oh, look, early in my career, I saw lots of really horrific soil compaction up here, and they just scoff at that. And I'm like, well, no, you need to take a pinch of our wisdom, and we need to talk about this together. And I'm not saying what you're doing is wrong, but I just want you to have some insight into what can happen in the longer term. So Yeah, there is a bit of those kind of things. I remember going to a great facilitated workshop where people say, well, everything is old is new again. And, we have definitely seen vineyard mechanisation, in terms of undervine mowers and undervine cultivation equipment. The generation and the type of gear you can get now is so sophisticated and so cool. And again, as part of an integrated program, there's absolutely a place for it. So, yeah, you see old stuff be reinvented and made better. So, there's some really good things that come through those cycles.
Sounding like you might be in the older group.
Oh, easy.
Oh no, I'm really open. If I had a blank checkbook, I would go and buy a bit of everything, and I'd do
there's a cost involved, isn't there?
One pass of that. It's just trying to manage where your priority to spend is. I can spend a lot more money on seed in a wet season and not buy some capital items. You've got to try and choose, given the conditions, what's the thing to invest in at the time.
How do you feel you've changed as a person through all this?
I think I've learnt to listen more. Like, I'm pretty noisy, but I do listen underneath. I've learnt to never say never. That's probably the biggest one. Like, revisit all those options, explore things that you never thought you would do. For me, putting out helicopters to fungicide in spring 2022, I'd kind of always gone, oh, why would you do that? And then suddenly when you've got vineyards that are either underwater or the ground's unsafe to access and you could lose your whole season, you go and look at things you weren't going to do. I think probably the thing I like the most about changing now is, opportunity comes with being older and wiser in the industry. So your ability to give other people a helping hand, help support them when they're not sure about their career choices or opportunities, and say, hey, maybe go and talk to them, or maybe open a door for someone. I didn't come from a wine family, and I found that really hard at the beginning of my career, that, we talk a bit about nepotism and cronyism in the industry, and for better or worse, it exists at varying levels. But, I like to think I can pay it forward a bit now and try and help some other people get that crack.
And we've actually had that conversation in earlier episodes, that it can be a difficult industry to break into, coming from, obtuse directions. But the industry needs that kind of diversity to come through. Is there a responsibility to create pathways once you've been through the door, to hold it open for others?
I think so. And that might be creating an opportunity, but sometimes it's just being a sounding board. It's talking to, I'm heartened by the number of women coming through, but, when they might ring you and go, how did you do maternity leave? Or how have you juggled this, and this? And sometimes it's just talking to them about strategy about your home life as much as your career. So, yeah, but yeah, absolutely. I do get, there are people who don't do anything for people around them. It's very much about them. I'd like, if there was only one legacy I could be remembered for, Nick, I think it would be that you've helped create opportunity for other people.
Yeah, the role of mentorship is vital in this industry.
Just elaborate a bit on what it's taken to forge your own path and get to where you are now.
Probably biting off more than I can chew, and chewing really hard. Those bits of advice my dad gave me quite early. Having a really supportive partner who doesn't always give me what I want, and probably gives me a bit of tough love from time to time. That's been a really good thing, and made me sit down and every couple of years and go, where are we going together, and what do you want? And making sure that I consider the pros and cons. And when I take the maybe more difficult path, still backs you in. So that's always really good. I think having a network has been really important. Moving from South Australia to New South Wales, relatively early in my career when we got married, having that network was pretty vital. So that's been a big part of it. And just being who you authentically are has been really important as part of it too. I call a spade, and you have to do that. You can't be what other people want you to be, and I think I've been really lucky. There's been some people along the way when I've been asked to do certain things and they weren't thrilling me, have said, that's not for you. And then again, just beavering away, and then you realise that you actually have become a bit of a subject matter expert in some area, or your skill set works for a whole lot of people. So yeah, it's a whole swag of stuff.
How do you think the approach to mental health's changed in the industry in the last 30 years? Have you seen some quite obvious shifts, or is it largely the same?
Oh, no, I think there's been a massive shift. I'll probably say it's even in the last 10 to 12 years. I think the fact we talk about it, it was never talked about at all. And, I think we also, as Australians, we tend to take the piss out of people, if they're not doing well, or, have not always been supportive. As much as we always talk about community, I think most of us over the years have found it awkward. I still find it awkward to reach out to people I know who are doing it a bit tough. And, my solution is sometimes turning up with a cake or going and fixing something rather than having a conversation, because that's hard. But it is talked about, and I think we're much more cognizant of it. So I think that's really good. And, social media has lots of bad points, but the little chat groups that sit behind it, for a whole lot of us in the viticulture world, has made the world a lot less isolating. So I think that connectivity that comes has probably also helped speed up that conversation, or enable you to make people feel less isolated. And again, the shared problem is either gets a solution, or we all, kind of commiserate together.
Yeah. Do we compound the problem by talking about, challenges in the industry and tough market conditions, and all anyone seems to want to talk about at the moment is doom and gloom? Is that compounding the problem, or is that just being honest about what everyone is confronting?
I think it is. I think it is beginning to. I think it's really wearing people down now. And it was interesting. I was delivering some sustainable wine growing training in Griffith in the last week and a half. And one of the things I really like about sustainable wine growing is your sustainability action plan becomes a record of your achievements. And, we spend so much time about what we're not doing well or what we can't have. Is, for me, looking at that once a quarter, is you're like, we've actually done some really cool stuff, and I think we need to spend a little bit more time quietly or loudly, depending on what it is, celebrating the things you're doing well, particularly when times are difficult, whether it's drought, whether it's financial difficulty, whether it's really wet, going, well, I've won
still
that
forward
battle.
Progress.
Yeah, and share that with other people, share it at home, share it with your colleagues, share it with your regional association. So, yeah, I think we do. I think we need to be not ignoring the big challenges we have, but let's recognise people doing well.
Yeah.
I think that's a difficult shift to make, because it seems like people are really conscious of not big noting themselves and not wanting to pat themselves on the back. And
this is the wine industry. There's more than enough people happy to big note themselves.
Yeah.
But I guess that part of Australian culture, though, where you can, it seems like you're a bit of a wanker if you want to talk about what's going well, that could even be called un-Australian. But, compared to the States in particular, where they'll tell you about anything positive, remotely positive, too much, and we cringe at that kind of attitude. But trying to bring more of that focus towards positivity in a way that seeps through and people actually feel it, we kind of veer away from that, don't we? We'd rather, if things are going well, it's kind of like, okay, well, other people are struggling, and maybe keep that to yourself. Or if some things are going well, ignore that yourself, because there's all these other things that could be going better, or there's something that's a disaster. We're going to focus on that instead. So it's not actually that simple to know how to celebrate those small wins, and who do you celebrate it with, and how much do you let yourself feel it versus trying to stay on an even keel. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it is really challenging. And, we recently had our local Hunter Valley Wine and Tourism Legends Awards, and, Chris Tyrrell, who was, is the current president of the association, just opened the night and said, we acknowledge that times are really difficult, but we're going to park that for tonight, and we're going to celebrate our community and our people. And, we went through, Rising Star, Viti of the Year, Winery of the Year, Celador of the Year, some legends were inducted, and that allowed everyone to do that exactly. It parked it. We celebrated the success of our region. And, I guess that's the big ticket night of the year, but it means you can then go and have conversations with those people and go, hey, show me what you're doing, and I think, we probably need to spin some of that back down at a grassroots level, and let's have the video of the year showcase us all for morning tea one day, and let's go and look at what they did, because I got to do some of the judging, and you see the applications, and you're like, oh, they're doing great stuff. So
and you can be reminded just about every time you open a bottle. At the moment, we're making the best, most exciting, compelling, diverse wines we've ever made. The results are there to see.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it makes it even more meaningful in a way, because it's a symbol of that resilience, and partly what bonds everyone together is going through tough times and finding a way through it, and remembering at the end of the day that you love this, and that is why you do that. And we've heard that a few times in this show, that there's doom and gloom, and you can focus on that, but it's like, okay, but why do you still get up every morning and slave away to make the dream work? It's because people love it and believe in it at the end of the day.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've just got to find those little bits that remind you why you do it. It was funny, yesterday I was slogging away dealing with 10 days worth of mostly unanswered emails, which no one loves. But one of the things I had to do was look up some Riesling clones for someone, and you're like, oh yeah, and I don't know that much about Riesling. So I had to make a few phone calls. I had some great chats with people. I came up with a great solution, given what options I had. And I literally then texted the client, went, oh, I've solved it. We've ordered this. And I went, oh, this has been the best thing of my day. This reminds me of why I like to do this, because you do that little bit of discovery, and you've set something off, like a little ball rolling that, that could be 20 years worth of, 25, 30 years of a new Riesling block going in somewhere. So, sometimes it's unexpected things that actually just remind you what's so cool.
I like what you said before about how you're the kind of person who's more likely to bring a cake around to someone if you know they're having a hard time, rather than look them in the face and say they need to tell you all about it. And I think it's worth noting that that's a very valid approach. There'll be plenty of people like that. And when it comes to trying to be there for someone who is struggling a bit, just showing them that you care about them and you're there for them is actually the main point. So I think for people listening who might say, oh yeah, I'd rather do something like that's just as good as going and having the long, deeping meaningful with someone.
I'm probably hoping we're going to eat the cake.
Yeah. Yeah, well, exactly. There's nothing wrong with that. There's got to be something in it for you as well.
Yeah. I'm struggling.
I think that's probably that's my armor. If I can turn up on the guise of the cake, or hey, I'm just going to drop something around because I think you might find that useful for the vineyard, or it probably makes it, for me, less confrontational. Like, that's probably my style, is I need that. So
having a reason to hang it on. There's nothing wrong with that. Like, if that's your style and that makes it easier to do, then I think that's perfectly valid for people to do. At the end of the day, people want to know that they're valued and people around them see them and care about them, and they might prefer that approach anyway. For yourself personally, when you've had some rough days over the years, how have people been able to be there for you or show support? They brought some cakes around?
Yeah, dropping cakes around.
Cake kind.
It's a real theme.
Cake kind.
Yeah. I'm a pretty avid gardener. It might be, I've got a couple of mates, we'll go and do a bit of gardening together. Or they might say, just pop around, we'll do a cup of tea and a garden walk. So cake and flowers, work for me. It might be, my husband's taken me away from the valley, let's just go to Sydney for a couple of days. So sometimes just exiting the scenario is good. I'm also getting better at finding my own escape, whether it's that driving to the beach, I'm trying to do a little bit of drawing, going for a walk. Just if I'm getting nothing done because it's grinding me down, I'll go and do something else now. There's no point sitting in the office procrastinating. You could turn that procrastination into a new garden bed, And
what about your husband? Do you see that generally men struggle a bit more in trying to accept when they're going through it, or?
Yeah, I think they do that retreat into themselves thing a little bit more than I would like. But they don't like it when you ask them what's going on. So again, it's trying to care and nurture for them and make sure that they're doing things to manage it. And sometimes that's really hard. Yeah.
What's his favourite cake?
Oh, he's pretty partial to a carrot cake.
Yeah.
Don't eat them very often. Yeah, he likes most things. Yep. He's never not eaten anything I've made in the cake department.
That older generation that is typically really stoic and will go into themselves. I don't know, earlier you said that you're seeing generally a shift in the way that we look at mental health, but some of those older heads, are you seeing a change in them where someone might speak up that wouldn't have in the past, or is it really just the younger generations that are doing it better?
I think those of us in our 50s and down are doing it better. I feel like our generation, it's made us uncomfortably comfortable. We're all getting to grips with it pretty well. And it may be partly also because many of us have children in their late teens or early 20s, and they've come through a schooling system that's had wellbeing days, and they're probably bringing us on the journey as much as everything else that we get served up. But I think our parents' generation and maybe the people 60 plus, no, I think they are still finding it harder. And I think for them it's this loss of face thing, whereas I think our generation's increasingly going, well, it's probably better to lose my shit a bit and talk to people about it than hold it up.
We'll wrap up shortly, but I think just because the significance of the timing, just before we started this episode, I just saw the news that one of the towering figures of Australian viticulture has passed away, Dr. Richard Smart. I just put you on the spot a little bit here, Liz, but do you want to make some comment on his contribution to Australian viticulture?
Oh, I think he's bigger than that, Nick. He's been a global figure.
Yeah.
He for the New Zealand, the Australian, and the bigger wine industry. His work he's really known for is obviously the canopy management work, and that made that a whole sphere of viticulture. And I think our industry has benefited from that, and he helped many of us early in our careers. That was kind of new stuff and a bit game changing. But there's so much other work he's done. More recently on climate change and when there's been big pathogen issues. Sort of through the late 90s. Richard was that voice that kept harping away and help get action on things that were going to be problematic for the industry. And they're probably not things consumers know about, but people in the industry know about. So he was nearly like an Achilles heel, but the Achilles heel we had to have, because he would keep pushing until people listened, and that has served us really well. So he'll be greatly missed on so many levels.
Yeah, it's a massive contribution.
Yeah, huge.
You mentioned earlier helicopters into the vineyard to spray under it's serious pressure, but I was talking to Steve Smith in New Zealand, Steve Smith MW, they're talking about they're using a lot of drones for spraying and work in the vineyard. Is that something we might see more and more of?
I think so. I think it's still complex with fungicides. Making products go into really concentrated solutions is one of the really big challenges. The regulatory world is not up to speed on that. And in New South Wales, if it's not on the label, you can't do that. So there's definitely some handbrakes. I think some of the interesting options for us would be things like, fertilising mid-rows. We've had a lot of rain and our mid-rows look really anemic, and we're like, you don't want to put a tractor out, but, maybe a drone fertilises the thing. So, again, I think that's starting to mature. So, we're all keeping a pretty close eye on that. And, probably just need the government to catch up a bit as well.
Yeah, it's just the drones world now, and we're just living in it.
Liz, what gives you faith in the next generation coming up? We had some very keen viticulture students in for one of our other episodes who just seemed super keen to get going, and got a favourable wine review from Nick Ryan to start off their careers, which they were pretty happy about.
Having come fresh from finishing exams and pruning the university vineyard.
It was a big day.
They've been pruning the university vineyard that you would have been involved in planting.
Yeah, absolutely. It's nice to see it's still there when I get to that neck of the woods. I think their enthusiasm. I've got a 25-year-old early career wine professional in my house. He's been in the vineyard and flirting with some winery time. They're just keen, and they want to learn. They want to take it all in. But at the same time, they're just fresh. We made the comment, not that we're old and tired, but, you get little bits of baggage as you go along. And I think it's their open-mindedness. I like the fact they challenge us, that's healthy. It's always interesting when it's a parent-child relationship doing that. But across all the young people I'm meeting, and I'm really heartened by how many are actually out there, is their genuine interest, their genuine desire to manage those vineyards as ecosystems and make amazing wines. That's still pretty exciting.
The future is bright.
Do you feel like
I think it is, yeah.
Do you feel like you've done it all, or is there still more to explore?
There's plenty more to explore. I would like to see us commercially growing, blocks of disease-resistant varieties, and that's still within my career. That would be really nice to get some of that to bottle. There's just always stuff that's new. You want to keep playing with it, whether it's the tech, the vines, the technique. But at the same time, for me, I've started to mix that up. I do a bit less in vineyards now, and I do a bit more in boardrooms and training rooms, and that's really rewarding. Like the industry training I've been doing sort of for 4 or 5 years now is really exciting. You get the benefit of sharing that experience. You get to meet new people coming through. That's exciting. And boardroom work, which is not all directly wine related, again, is hoping to pass on, how it works for the agricultural and wine industry people, and adding some reality to maybe people who just sit in offices. You're adding a skin in the game flavour to people that might be experts in finance or legal or even subject matter experts, but you can just bring a little, like, this is how it works out there. This is the decision-making process of a grower, or this is the impact that might have. So those roles are becoming really interesting, and you can't do those until you've got a level of experience. So I'm enjoying that. My career's, I guess, had an evolution, particularly in the last 5 years now, where I'm lucky because of our family vineyards, and I've kept a few clients that I'm still in the vineyard, but it's nice to be doing some other stuff that's really paying it backwards and forwards, but growing me further. So that's really good.
It's great.
It's good to have a challenge. Thanks, Liz.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Liz. Great to chat.
Have fun. Don't have too many bottles of wine for lunch.
Thanks for listening. Head to the Wine Grape Council of South Australia website for links and further resources. This is part of a bigger conversation, so feel free to share this podcast with your mates and look after yourselves. Cheers.